subdivision plan for Cassie Court off of Newman Avenue, followed by a presentation by the Fort Thomas Independent School District on the track and soccer field complex at Tower Park. And then finally, a review of Article 5 and 7 of the zoning code update, which we'll get to at the end. And with that, I guess first we'll just review our meeting minutes from the August 16th meeting.
I'll move for approval of the minutes as drafted.
Second.
Any other comments? Good. We have a motion and a second. Everybody approve of the meeting minutes for August 16th?
Aye.
So ordered. Okay, next up is a review of the subdivision plan for Cassie Court. Is there somebody from the developer today to make any comments?
Yeah. Senator.
Yes, Senator, please give your name and who you represent.
My name is Evan Wall. I'm with Dries Homes, and I'm here to answer or try to answer any questions you might have. Matt Means is running the development, and he couldn't be here tonight, so I'm filling in for him. So he's texting me if I need to text him any questions, but I'll do my best.
Is there anything you want to say?
Yeah.
And with that, we'll turn it over to Elisa Rogers, We'll turn that over to Elisa Rogers, who is the consultant with CT Consultants, who is the civil engineer that reviewed the plat.
So you may have noticed on the agenda that the approval of both the preliminary and the final plat is in front of you this evening. Several months ago, what you approved was a stage 1 development plan. And unfortunately, what didn't happen was approval of a preliminary plat. And the way the subdivision ordinance is drafted, you actually have to approve something that is labeled as a preliminary plat before you can approve the final plat. So what's before you this evening is really and truly the final plat. The lots have been, the improvements have been put in place, and we're ready for a final plat with the exception of 2 things. But in order for the procedures to be correct, you need to take one motion and vote on the preliminary plat. And then if you're fine with that, come in and then do the final plat. You may have noticed that when you originally looked at the stage 1 plan, there were lots on Highview Court that were a part of the stage 1 plan several months ago. Those lot lines are not being adjusted as a part of that, so it's not included on the final plat that's in front of you this evening. There are 2 outstanding issues in terms of the final plat, both of which are quite minor. One is that there's some language inconsistency in the HOA documents in terms of how they relate to the plat. Specifically, the HOA documents talk about an open space easement and an open space lot, whereas on the plat it talks about it being something that is owned and managed by, that is, has an access easement and maintenance easement for, in particular, the stormwater. And so it would be helpful if the HOA documents use the same language as what is on the plat. And so that is what we're waiting on. And then the other thing is lot 26 in and of itself is not a buildable lot, and the final plat states that it will be given to the people who own that large lot that fronts on Highview. And what we're missing is written authorization from them that they are willing to consolidate that portion of that lot onto their lot. As I understand it, it's been a verbal commitment, and so it's just a matter of paperwork. If there's anything else you would like to add to that?
No, that's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So those are the procedural issues. Any questions?
I can't find lot 24. Can you tell me where lot 24 is?
So
25 is the one off Home Street, and 26 is the one at the end of Highview. But the lots going around Cassie go from 1 to 23.
123.
So lot 24 was supposed to be that small lot on Highview, and they were going, that was what it was during the plan that you saw that was called a stage 1 plan. They were going to adjust the lot line for lot 24 in order to give frontage to lot 26. That is no longer on the table, and they did not renumber the lots. So lot 24 is not a part of this subdivision.
Could you just kind of review the drainage to the north and how you're gonna deal with that? I know there are a couple catch basins in there, there's a swale, but we have increased the slope of that yard, and it could cause a problem for the folks who are on Jennifer Court. You could kind of tell us what your thoughts behind the drainage there and between the houses.
Yeah, between the houses, which, on Jennifer Court, you're asking, those houses?
No, between the new lot, the houses on the new lots. Right now, it shows them draining into the adjoining property. Seems like you need a swale or something between those.
Yes.
Property lines.
Yes.
Might be a note here someplace that says that that's gonna be done in the field, but, sometimes you guys do that.
Yeah.
Bigger concern is the slope you've created, like between lots 5 and 9. And how now we have a fairly steep bank there, where we used to have a little less of a slope. And I see a couple catch basins. I just kind of wanted to hear you say how you think that's going to catch the stormwater and not create a problem for the folks on Jennifer Court there.
Yeah. Like you said, there are the catch basins, and everything will drain down to the new retention pond, and SD1 has accepted the stormwater plans and the sanitary plans, so they've reviewed those.
Well, now you've got the downward slope and then a swale, but it continues down. That's the part I'm concerned about, the runoff that continues down beyond the swale.
Okay, can I come and ask you which part exactly you're sir?
See, you've got swale along here, swale along here, catch basin there and there, left out. So this slope is still continuing on down. These slopes back up. That's what I'm concerned about. These guys don't get flooded out.
How are you? How you doing? Do you have any information on that swale? Do you know what he's talking about?
Yeah, his concern is, with these lots.
So this catch basin here, water will come down here and get caught in here and go to the storm water, but he's concerned about the runoff coming down the hill further into the, over here. So going down into the houses here on Jennifer Court. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I don't have any more information on that, but I can ask Matt Maines. If he, I mean, I don't think that, they haven't voiced that as a concern, but.
I've seen subdivisions where they change the gentle slope to the steep one, and just velocity of the water comes down, even though it's not a great amount of surface area. I mean, you could possibly flood the backyard to some of those folks. I just, you know, you have an engineer tell me they've done the calcs and the amount of water that they get there.
I understand.
And they actually tell me where it's, I guess there is a catch basin, an existing one there. Yeah.
Is the catch basin that's shown on, I'm not sure which plan drawing it is, the concept plan, it looks like there's a, well, it looks like there's a catch basin in the rear of lot 7 at the toe of the slope, but is that an existing catch basin or is that a new catch basin that was installed as part of the development? It's not really clear on the drawing. And so I guess there was some analysis done, the capacity analysis to make sure that that could collect the new drainage, tributary drainage area going to that.
Yeah, I think that was all looked at as part of the SD1's, acceptance of this. I don't really have any particular information about
We have a lot of documents related to that. I haven't really gone through them all myself.
And just to reiterate about the portion of lot 26 that's going to be joined with the adjacent parcel, have you received, have you communicated the fact that they need to provide some written confirmation of that transfer?
It is, I don't think, so the letter hasn't been sent yet. Matt was working on it today and is going to send it out to them probably, I don't know when, but he's going to send it out to them and then they'll sign it. And then upon the platting of this community, that'll be immediately conveyed over to them.
You can't really approve something that creates a non-conforming lot, though, so if we don't have that paperwork signed, I don't see how legally we can approve this.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Tim, that's a question. I mean,
Yes,
is that something that we can't do conditionally?
we've done a number of things conditionally, like with the situation at the country club with the house that's being constructed up there now. It was more of a minor matter. It was some of the property being conveyed from the country club to the landowner. It never dealt with conformity of the lot. We always had a conforming lot. I think you could do it conditionally, but they need to understand that literally, if it doesn't happen, go back to square one.
Understood.
I mean, it would be cleaner, obviously, if that transfer occurred first, then platted separately.
Absolutely. What's the timetable for that?
Once the letter's drafted, which I believe it was done today, I think it's just a matter of going and getting a signature from them. So as soon as I can get a hold of them, probably try tomorrow. I don't know. I don't know for sure because Matt's been working on it, but
You know the grade on the street, the maximum grade on Capsule Lane?
I don't. I can try to find out real quick.
Well, we asked that question at the other hearing, and they said that it met the requirement of the zoning, but it'd still be nice to know
What it is.
how steep it was, so that we confirm we weren't creating a hazard when we're time or something like
Okay.
I did drive down there today. It's not, I would say the maximum was probably 6-7%. Going up right there, where the kink is it goes up to noon. That's not, it's not severe. And I get the plan is to put the walk in after the homes are constructed, as each lot is constructed, put the sidewalk in as you go incrementally.
That's correct.
Are there plans to actually put in a driveway for lot 25, or is it just meet the access requirement for that lot? I mean, is there an intent to actually create an access there?
Yeah. From our subdivision?
Correct, because you got the graded slope there on that,
Yeah.
the leg of the flag lot, so that's why I was curious.
Yeah, no, I understand. No, there will not be an access coming from Catesy Court. That was just to get the legal frontage to make it a conforming lot. And we're putting in an easement. It's a maintenance and use easement for lot 13 that they are going to be responsible for maintaining that.
I mean, in the future, hypothetically, if there would be a property owner on lot 25 in the future, they presumably do have rights to put a driveway there, correct?
I asked that same question, and Matt said that part of the use and maintenance easement restricted that.
I mean, that's a question, Tim. How can we make it a conforming lot with access if we're denying access?
And explain to me again what part, because I was talking to Mark.
Oh, I'm sorry. My question was,
Oh, yeah.
where the connection is from lot 25 to the cul-de-sac. You know, they graded that out to create the cul-de-sac, essentially. And my question was there a plan to put a driveway there? And there's no immediate plan to put a driveway there, but, and he said the easement language basically prohibits that access in the future. But if we're creating this to make it a conforming lot with access, and we're denying the ability to ever have access, isn't that kind of a,
Absolutely.
you know?
Yeah, that is not acceptable, and my reading of the easement did not, I didn't see that in it, but all I saw was what was on the plat, the language that was on the plat. So, yeah, that would not be acceptable in terms of making the lot conforming, because the whole issue was allowing it to have frontage if in time they lose their access to Main Avenue, which is currently an access easement across someone's property.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it would necessarily change the layout of the subdivision or the way that the plat is structured, but if a future landowner on 25 wished to put a driveway up that hill, they could do so.
Probably could, okay. Yeah, well, I apologize, I misspoke.
Just so we kind of go back to that question about the grade, max grade is 8% on the street, so I do have that answer for you guys.
Thanks for that. And Matt just texted me back, he said, I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's well below the max. It's pretty flat.
So there, Mark is indicating there may be access off of Main, is that right, wrong?
Yeah, yes, that's correct. Yeah, there's current access from Maine. That's how that homeowner currently gets to their house.
But as I understood, there's not actually a legal easement or access off of Main, but they've done it, so it's.
It's been there forever.
Right.
And what the plat says for that maintenance and use easement is that an easement is shown on the record plat or plats for the property created for the benefit of lot 13. The owner of lot 13 will be allowed to use this area and will be responsible for the care and maintenance of the easement area. No structures are allowed on the easement. So there's nothing that prevents access.
So if lot 25 is the legal owner of that strip.
Correct. But lot 13 can, use it, can garden on it or whatever else.
Yeah, correct. Well, unless they put a driveway there.
Correct. And right now, the easement across Main Avenue is not specified.
And, at some point down the road, I don't know, I was trying to remember, is lot 25 big enough where presumably that property owner could split that lot if he wanted to in the future, potentially.
Not because then he wouldn't have access.
Well, if he ever resolved the access off of Main and with the existing house, he wanted to split it up and put another house somewhere on 25 and have access up to the new street.
Yeah, and I know it is a steep slope there, so
Right.
it could be pretty hard, but I understand your point.
I guess what I'm saying is don't, for lot 13, don't put your hot tub there or your patio, I mean, I think with some of the questions resolving around lot 26 and, I believe probably the stormwater has been addressed through SD1's review and the easements that will be recorded by them. But I do think it would probably be best to defer action on our part until lot 26 is removed from the subdivision, essentially.
Okay.
You could go ahead and approve the preliminary plat tonight.
Yeah, we can approve the preliminary plat. Unless somebody else has an objection.
There is an easement shown for the catch basins off Jennifer Court, which I assume SD1 owns and maintains, but on the survey, I don't see any kind of easement. So if SD1 needs to work on that, the DOT's survey doesn't show easement for them to do so. And it's shown as if it's on lot 7.
your drawing, I think, looked different than these.
Is this the preliminary plat, drawing and not the final plat drawing?
This is, I can put the final one.
So that's where the difference is. The final plat does, indicate the actual easement location.
Can you bring that up real quick?
The catch basin on Jennifer Lane, there is an easement coming from Jennifer Lane back to that catch basin for that, the original plat for, the Camelot Section 2, which is listed on the final plat here for, Drees's plat. Shows an easement coming from Jennifer Lane back to that catch basin at the back of, I guess it's lot 23. And it shows that it's all being on the catch basin is actually fully on the property of Jennifer Lane's property. So I don't know why it's shown on the preliminary plat of being on lot 7 for, the Cassie Court subdivision. Because I did find the recorded plat for Jennifer Lane, and it shows I remember it's 5 or 10 foot, I think it's a 10-foot easement coming off of Jennifer straight back to the catch basin.
Well, I mean, I guess the question is, did they locate that in the field on lot 7? Or was it extended and replaced with a new catch basin? I don't know.
I don't know either.
I don't think any work was done on the original catch basin. I'm not understanding why it's drawn on the preliminary plat that way.
Right, that's what I'm asking is, was it actually field located with a survey, or was it just based on the SB1 GIS information, and they just, I don't know. I guess that would be something else. Obviously, we can approve the preliminary plat, but I think it's something that would, need to be confirmed.
Clarified, does it back its full straw, and, it doesn't take that runoff that we have.
Well, nobody wants
to record.
Nobody wants to take care of it.
Yeah. That's what it is. Make sure SB1 has full access to it.
That catch basin to the north of lot 7 looks like that's from GIS, but I couldn't say without my software exactly where that is located. It was located in the field, I just couldn't say exactly on the line distance on the plot.
Okay. Does anybody else have any comments, questions?
So Dave, the things that between preliminary and final, we need to hear from them on this catch basin issue.
Yeah.
And access regarding lot, is that 13? 25.
Right, and then the transfer of lot 26, or just the removal of lot 26 from the subdivision.
Thank you.
And the updated HOA documents.
Yes.
Right, and yeah, consistency between the easement language and the HOA bylaws. Anything else?
I'll move to approve the preliminary plat, subject to the 4 or 5 items that we just mentioned.
Well,
Make this part of our motion.
for those conditional for approval of the preliminary plat, those would be for the final plat.
I think we preliminarily just.
We can approve the preliminary. I move to approve the preliminary plat as drawn.
I second.
We have a motion and a second. Everybody's aye for? Aye. So word, the preliminary plat is approved and the vote on the final plat will be deferred until those questions are resolved.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Next up, we have a presentation from the Fort Thomas Independent School District on the proposed soccer field track complex at Tower Park.
I'm guessing you guys would like me to use the microphone, and I want to say hello and welcome. We feel welcome and excited to be here to share with you something we've been working on for little over a year, and we're getting closer and closer to bringing to fruition. So we're excited to share with you some of the plans, some of the why, to get some of your feedback, but also to thank the city for their involvement and cooperation and support all along the way. With me today, my name is Brian Robinson. I'm the superintendent of Fort Thomas Schools. With me is Jeff Beach, long-term board member for our Board of Education, and Joe Hayes, who is our architect on this plan. I think in your packet you have our preliminary bid document that we sent out that would indicate in more detail. So the presentation that I'm going to give to you is more of the overview. Joe will be able to answer any of the logistical questions or some of the details of the project itself. And Jeff will also definitely be able to share a perspective on behalf of the board. Theoretically, if this thing works, we'll be in good shape. Batteries are important, so we're gonna go with my So as you can see, I have been in the district or associated with the district for long enough that we actually, when we look at this space, we've had a space that compared to 30 years ago, it was an amazing one. However, at the same time, our district has grown in our opportunities for students, our involvement, engagement with students, and we've collected a lot of areas of concern that we believe it's time to address for a variety of reasons. So some of our why, as we start to think about how we reimagine this space here in Tower Park, the space that we currently have has a limited track capacity. We have 6 current lanes, which prevents us from having large meets, regional meets. We may have some smaller, really small group meets for our track team. And so it's very limited in its capacity. It's also at a minimum width. If you've gone up to watch soccer games, you'll see our players that are inbounding it from the track, and it's actually at a smaller size than what we'd be allowed to utilize for sectional meets or sectional tournaments or even larger tournaments. We have no locker rooms, no restroom access to the athletes. I've often made it a little bit of a funny that if you ever see a kid in the middle of a soccer match sprinting across the field, it's not to give something to mom. They're on a journey there and they have a purpose. We have very limited handicap accessibility in the current makeup. Inefficient lights, sound, scoreboard, which has been a real challenge for some of our neighbors. Exceptionally limited parking for our fans. If you've been up there at any point, dropping off or trying to find a spot to park is a bit of a Frogger expedition there as you're trying to get around the cars. Traffic and parking congestion is really, as we've used this space more and more, and it is a space that currently, as is used 7 days a week and almost all year long. You'll see many cars that are parked along Army Reserve Road, and the congestion is quite a challenge. We've already talked a little bit about unsafe drop-off and entry conditions and limited shelter for severe weather. In addition, seating has been quite limited, which if we were to expand any of our programming is a challenge. Limited ability to expand to other sports. And we are always looking for new and better and different ways to engage our students. Just in the last few years, we've added archery and bowling and wrestling and a variety of things. One of the sports that's growing regionally is lacrosse, and we don't have a space for that. We don't have immediate plans for that, so please don't leave here and tell my baseball coach that we're going to add lacrosse. But having the capacity as we reimagine a space is important. No capacity for training opportunities for other sports and other sport activities. It's difficult for emergency response in the limited times that we do need to serve that area. Officials changing spaces and locker rooms does not currently exist. We do not have space for an athletic trainer to assess or treat a student who may be injured in the midst of an event. And really, we've been able to have very little investment in this space up until present date. So why now? Why are we looking at it now? We were very blessed that 12 years ago we had a group that came together to turf the field, but that turf is at the end of life. It is time to replace it, and when you're making a major investment, we look for an opportunity to address all of the other issues that I mentioned before. It's also a unique opportunity because this is one of the few spaces that the district actually owns, at least the majority of it. So a lot of our athletic endeavors are on city land through our partnership, whether it's at Highland Park or our tennis courts or cross country. There's just a variety of places that we don't have the ability to improve. This is one of the spaces that we do. We're also at a time where through the hard work of many over the last 25 years, we've been able to improve all of our academic spaces. So all 5 schools are state of the art, and we have some opportunities to start to address some other things. We also have a window currently of flexibility where we can use some of our current funding mechanisms to use it on spaces like this. There was some flexibility given through the state legislature 2 years ago that does officially expire if it doesn't get renewed this next General Assembly. And then finally, we have some possibilities for some private support as well that we're working through. So here's the artistic rendering of what we're trying to create. You'll notice that the field, in order to address a lot of the issues and almost all of the issues that we talked about, rotates. So it rotates, so it goes to the side towards Sargent Avenue as opposed to going towards Army Reserve. And then our intention from the start was to make this a community project, to look at the Tower Park space and the partnership and interest of what we've always followed, to make sure that it blends in and brings together the nature of the park. And so you'll see that the locker room and the training facility that we have next to it mimic a lot of the architecture from the park, and then brings together some of what we've done within our school buildings as well. This is the artistic part. You guys get the black and white in your packet. Here's another more detailed drawing. You'll see that we essentially triple our parking capacity. We also will change the entry into the parking lot itself. Currently, this is Army Reserve, and this would be the current entrance. We're kind of going with the arrow here. We straighten this up to allow for less congestion, direct access into the parking lot, a 4-way stop as motorists would go into the neighborhood. And then we can also add some sidewalks and connect the neighborhood to the park itself. Ultimately, by doing this project, and we're hopefully getting close to being able to take that start, we make it truly accessible for all of our patrons. We continue this as a community space. This is a very unique situation that, as I've gotten into the project, going back to the late 70s and early 80s, was truly a community embrace project. And so from the start, and we will continue to serve in this way, when it's not being utilized as a school space, it is an open space for people to use the track. We've actually done some design work so that there would be public restrooms at the front that would be open up for the community to use as they need to. It expands the parking and egress for the neighborhood, which we believe will significantly improve that environment for the neighborhood back in the Sargent Avenue area. Provides more safety for entry into the actually parking lot. So if you're dropping off your kids, you have some opportunities there. We believe it enhances the connection to the park for many. The field orientation allows us to be really purposeful in how we target our lights and sound, so that while we still intend to have a lot of events, we can use some modern designs to hopefully reduce some of the noise and light pollution in that area. And really, at the end of the day, we're always working to be a destination location for that area of town, for future families, and as people come into to our neighborhood and compete. Like that. Jeff, is there anything that we left out or anything that you would like to add? Or Joe, any special?
I can answer any technical questions and schedule those kind of things.
So is the lot being filled in to raise up, to be level with the Army Reserve and Sergeant? Because right now it's kind of down in the hill.
It's gonna be brought up some, but it's not gonna be level.
Okay.
I mean, so it's probably like another 5-6 feet higher than what it currently is. It's still not gonna be, the same elevation as Army Reserve.
And really, this, I believe, Joe, and you can correct me, this portion of Army Reserve will be modified.
Yeah, that's gonna raise up a little bit, just because we have to make the transition, like at that 4-way stop,
Right.
As you go up towards the hospital.
And you had studies done for the buffer and the lights, so that they won't go back to the neighborhood in the back?
Well, the lights are gonna be really good because they're LEDs and they don't spill out like the current ones do.
Right.
So I'm not worried about the lights whatsoever. But the sound is actually gonna project towards the stands, which is gonna go up towards the hospital and like away from the neighborhood. Does that make sense?
It's not time for public comment yet. Thank you.
And then the traffic, have you done a study on the traffic program, traffic, how it's gonna go in and out? Because River Road right there is no lights or anything.
Well, we have consulted quite a bit with Matt Kramer and talked about entrances into the existing space. I can't speak for Matt. He has not voiced any concern to me about the traffic patterns. Most of the traffic patterns that we've created here was to enhance or improve entrance into that space. While we could have a small handful of events that would be larger in nature, it's used all the time, and it's used by Kings Hammer, it's used by Campbell County North Soccer Program, it's used pretty much throughout the year. And so the number of people that would come, we don't expect it to increase significantly. We expect it to be a handful of events where they're major track events, or hopefully the sectional soccer tournament. But it's an existing facility that is serving an existing group of individuals, and so from all of our work, we believe it would only enhance the traffic patterns.
I know that Matt does not anticipate any traffic study.
Okay, thanks. I was just concerned if it was like every weekend that you were having big college events there. Because right now there are events and it does get heavy out there. But if it was every single weekend, because it's not now, and that's what the unknown.
Now, could there be new opportunities that don't exist now? It's possible, but it's not likely to be something. The why isn't to serve a whole new set of people. It's to serve our current programs.
Have you had input from the Army Reserve?
We have not had direct input from the Army Reserve. They use the space though, with great frequency.
Yeah, I was just thinking more in terms of vehicle circulation in and out of lots, bringing equipment in and out when they have their weekend drills, those types of things when you're going maintenance traffic during construction, and then just the final configuration at the end if they had concerns.
Joe, in terms of the current setup versus the proposed?
I know Matt's been dealing with them. Remember, originally he was emailing, his contacts at the Army Reserve, and they're aware of the project. And I know Frank with CT, he's seen this and kind of gave us some feedback as far as some engineering comments.
Some of our initial conversations with the government was a potential land swap, even so that we could straighten out this road through that area, but it doesn't move fast in those discussions. They weren't opposed to the construction there. It was more of a exchange of land and property.
Right.
Having grandkids that play soccer there. The problem is when one game is over and the next one comes. And you pretty much have to wait for someone to leave a parking space to get in, and just increasing the parking anyway and it's so much easier to get to than the way it is now, where you have a number of 90-degree turns to get in there and a number of significant elevation changes. It really looks like it would work so much better than it does now.
The other thing with that road coming in is that there won't be parking on the road. So we'll have a sidewalk there, you'll have guardrails, so you're eliminating all the parking that happens even on the gravel side of the track today. So we would guide everybody into the lots instead of having them park along the side in the grass. I was at a game on Monday that had, it wasn't a big game, and like Notre Dame will be next week, but still there was no parking anyway. So I was on the opposite side of the Armory just for a small game. So it's a nightmare parking up there. And that's why people park wherever. This should take them off the roads and put them into parking lots where they should be. And it gets them away from Carmel Manor and the Armory because it directs them straight out towards the hospital.
Yeah, I was just curious about the smaller, I don't know how many spaces there are, 12 spaces, maybe this little lot right up here at the entrance of the very north end. Was that really necessary to have additional spaces, or it just seems?
And Joe can speak to this. Some of this was actually originally designed as a result of an SD1 pump there. That may be going away. Do you want to speak to that, Joe?
Yeah, up at the top side of that parking lot, there's an SD1 pump station, but that handles some of the buildings around there. I guess we're looking at demolishing that, doing a new gravity line, so then that current parking lot, that'll get reconfigured.
So that's why I guess I'm asking, this little parking area.
That's gonna go away.
That's a temporary scenario.
It only exists to provide access to the existing pump.
Okay.
And then to make use of that space. But it's likely in everyone's best interest that be reconfigured.
So in the new entrance drive coming down the hill behind the nursery school there, that'll be a dedicated public street basically. That won't be school board property, that'll be city property.
Correct.
And it looks like there's 2 sets of steps either side coming off the road down into the facility, is that correct? It was kind of hard to see the scale of the drawing.
Yeah. See right where his cursor is? It's that dark line there. There's a set of steps that takes you from the public sidewalk.
Right, that's what it looked like.
Yeah, down to the school's property. Then there's another set that takes you up to that referee building.
Right. So is that referee building staying as it is, basically?
We're gonna renovate it.
Okay. And around the actual track itself, are the heavy lines, are those retaining walls, or what does that represent?
Yeah, retaining walls.
Do you have an idea of how tall those are gonna be?
Well, they go from, yeah, like you kind of see in the rendering, I think the tallest one is 13 feet, something like that.
They're pretty substantial.
Are those gonna have like fencing on top?
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Fall protection?
Yeah, it'll have a guardrail for the cars and a fence for pedestrians. You know, just based on those inside this car, walk up there.
One of the nice things about the field now is it is down in a hole and noise isn't as big a problem. You're saying it's only gonna be like 6 feet higher?
Yes.
So it still is gonna have some of those same characteristics. This sounds kind of mundane, but have you thought about dumpsters and where you're gonna put them and how you're gonna screen them and all that, because you have concessions and things there?
There's gonna be, we kind of carved out a couple spots over there by the referee building down the road. If you go back to the site plan, it's not shown there yet, but it's gonna be, like we kind of carved some in there, like other handicaps, yeah, like right in that area. It'll have, masonry walls around it with gates.
You got lots of animals in the park.
Oh, I'm sure.
Needs to be fairly secure.
It'll likely be improved from the 2 garbage cans we have there now.
So Mark, do you know as a city, once the road is reconstructed on the west side, with the new sidewalk and everything, will there be signage there prohibiting parking? Or will,
I'm not sure, but I'm sure there will be. I mean, it sounds like they're gonna put up guardrails and stuff through there to help, like I said, direct people into the parking lot, not park along the road.
It's gonna get curb and gutter too, so I mean,
Right.
like, that kind of prevents people from just pulling off to the side.
You know, I'm just wondering if people would pull, park literally on the pavement.
And speaking with Matt, I can tell you that that's been addressed. I know you'll probably hear from some folks that really it's been a problem in the past, people parking on the side, and I think that's in great part due to the fact that we've had insufficient parking.
Right.
And if we get proper parking, hopefully that shouldn't be a problem anymore.
When are you anticipating to begin it, and how long will it take to do, you think?
You just asked the same question I've been asking for about 6 months. Joe's tired of that question. They're ready to ban them. We are hopeful as early as this fall to at least do a phase. It's still to be determined if it's a phased project or a complete one done from start to finish. So, but we are hopeful at least one phase can start this fall.
I was just kind of curious, what is the triangular area here? Is that for like shot put, or what is that?
Yeah, that's chocolate.
So as far as cut and fill goes, this is a balanced site, you won't have to truck dirt in or out.
There is gonna be some export, but I guess Matt has a spot down River Road that he wants to do.
Yeah, Matt is excited to get the dirt to increase some other practice fields.
What is your stormwater detention facility on the site?
It's actually gonna be below the field. Yeah.
Which is not the current case, right?
Have you had any official feedback from Carl Mayer?
I made contact with them a couple days ago. I'm in the process of setting up a meeting with them. I mean, we shouldn't be impacting, I mean, like, that existing roadway is gonna be left untouched.
Any questions?
This is an advisory, you see it, right? Still make motions.
Yeah, we mostly wanted to make sure as good partners that we shared with you some of our exciting news and with the experience that you have in the planning of all parts of our town. If there are suggestions or thoughts that haven't been considered, we definitely would like to entertain any perspectives that you could offer.
I guess one thing, Mark, it would be interesting to know what discussions that Matt may have had with, the Army Reserve or Carmel Manor or any of the surrounding residents, just going to know if there's any concerns on their part or issues that we're not aware of.
We reached out to Matt this afternoon after he left, and we've not heard back from him, so we're not sure.
But in the future, I mean.
Yeah, because we wanted to know too, they'll answer questions tonight, and, I'm sure, if there's any concerns that will be brought up and passed on to the school too.
We did conduct a community forum this past spring that was fairly well attended at the mess hall. Made some changes as a result of the feedback that came there. We've received some additional feedback from some of the residents in Sargent, and I know Matt has also met with some of those folks as well. But the Army Reserve, I don't know that we've had that level of discussion in terms of the renovation.
I don't know, but with Matt's connection with that group, I'm sure he has. But I'd be surprised if he is now.
They were made aware we're doing the project,
Right.
but we haven't necessarily shared the plans.
I've dealt with working with the Corps on other Army Reserve facilities, so I just know sometimes they can be sensitive to maintenance of traffic and construction and things. One other question real quick too is, I guess I understand that there's potentially a land swap where the city will actually take ownership of the south soccer field there next to the reserve lot. And there's, could you explain a little bit of kind of maybe the land swap discussion or?
Yeah.
what's the plan?
Currently, there is some space,
Dennis was also.
there, if you look at the rotation of the field, there is a movement of Sargent Avenue. It will move into well, just I don't know if that's east of the field itself. And then some property where the edge of the field is currently city owned. The South Park practice field is actually school district owned, as is about maybe 15 to 20% of the road itself of Army Reserve. Functionally, that's been scheduled and maintained to some level by the city. And so our intention is to seek an agreement, MOA with the city, and at the conclusion of the project, to basically identify the areas that are under control and that would be maintained and improved in the future by either entity and redraw the property lines at that point. And so South Park is one of those areas. South Park is currently scheduled by the city and maintained, and so we would make that an official transfer of property at the conclusion of the project.
Dave, that MOA has been circulated, it's nowhere near finished yet, but that is part of the concept.
And there were some discussions about making some of those transfers on the front side of it, but because you could have some site decisions that would be 5 feet here or 10 feet there, we wanted to complete it, and then any substantive change that would need to occur that would go back in front of both of our decision makers, the board and the city council.
Thank you.
Excited about the project. I'll get you guys in a flag football league or something.
Are we allowed to speak now?
If you want to have public.
Yeah, we can have some public comment. I guess just one thing I'd like to reiterate though before we get into any discussion from the public is this is a school board project. It's not under the control of the city necessarily on their property. Obviously, there's a level of coordination between the two on the streets and the surrounding area and the infrastructure, but in terms of zoning, the school district is essentially exempt from zoning control. So we don't have the decision-making authority as the same as we would with a private property owner. So I just wanted to put that out.
And the other thing, if your concern is whether or not this should happen and cooperation should occur, it's really best addressed with the council.
Correct.
But, there you go. That's all I've got to say.
And if you have a comment, if you could just come up to the podium and give your name and.
Just understand it's not a question and answer session.
I think
Right.
it's soon, but I'll see what I think it is. Thank you, guys. How you doing, folks?
Hi, I'm Maria Shaw. I have two questions. Number one, would this be exclusively to be used by Fort Thomas schools, or would it be regionally open, that you would make it available for events to other schools?
It would operate in a very similar manner, so it's primarily for use of students within the Thomas Independent Schools. It is currently there's a schedule for rentals, and there's an open access for the community for the track. But it's not an open and free use for regionally, but I would expect Kings Hammer has some regional programs and things that would continue to compete there.
So it would be more than just events for Highlands or Moyer?
Very
It would
similar
be
to
to the,
this town.
well, I don't know how it is now, that's my purpose of my question. Would it be used by schools in Covington or Alexandria, so there would be more usage than a normal?
We would expect others that use that space to use it at a very similar rate that they use it now, and currently when they use it, they rent that space.
Right, but I'm considering the noise level. As you redirect it from Sargent, you have to redirect it in another direction. And what would be the limitation of how many events would be held, and at what time of day, and what decibel level?
I don't know that we've measured the decibel level yet, or looked at those types of guidelines. We definitely want to be good neighbors. We would have a reasonable use of that space, but we haven't necessarily limited. We don't have current guidelines that would limit the usage of it. It's almost used to capacity currently.
But it's lower now. And things that are held at Tower Park are heard as far as Linden Avenue currently. So currently, we don't have a public address system in a building of that size. I expect there would be more people coming if your building stands.
Would you expect the sound to be significantly different?
I mean, it's adjustable. So, I mean, you know, if it's too high, I mean, that's up to you guys to lower it down, so.
And
Well,
ma'am,
who would determine that?
ma'am, if you've got things you wanna
Well, I
state, this just really isn't the forum for a question and answer right now. If
Oh, I
you
thought you
wanna
were
make a
opening up
statement.
to question.
Well,
Because
honestly,
that's what Mike-
I'd love to give you, I'll give
Yeah,
you my
that's
card
okay.
and contact information, we can schedule a time
That's
that you would love to.
Yes, it is. I like the questions.
Sharon McKnight, 62 Miller Lane. This is the first time I've seen this size project, the final thing here. And I think this is a zoning question. When you have a project this big and you're putting stands in and everything, isn't there some different kind of even more extra buffer to protect that community back there from their quality of life? I mean, are you speaking with them and talking with them and thinking of what buffer is needed, extra buffer for that?
We're talking about the neighborhood behind.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. I mean, you got houses right there, you're gonna build it up. You got 2 houses right there, you got houses, that whole neighborhood actually. So I didn't know if there's an extra buffer that needs to be done for a project this size?
Well, like I said, because the school district is a public entity, they're exempted from zoning control. So while obviously what you're saying is an important consideration for the neighborhood zone sergeant, that's really between the school district and the surrounding residents and the city government at large. But in terms of the zoning and the planning commission's purview over that, we don't really have any purview over.
Gotcha, but like you said, this is a community project, so you're working with the community back there, right? So you're listening what their concerns are and everything? Okay, because I mean, to me, if you're trying to get large regional meets and even larger tournaments, you're gonna have more people, and that noise allowed with the crowd and the screen, I mean, I don't know what kind of study you can do, but I think I'd be mindful of that for that whole area back there, so thank you for letting me talk, appreciate it.
Thank you.
Elizabeth Allegrini, 45 Lockwood Place. I guess I just have, I guess they're questions, but I can say something to the people that are concerned about the number of events that are up there. I'm very in touch with that soccer community, and currently they do have tournaments going up there for King's Hammer. So I don't think those will change. The only thing that they will have the track meets that will be a draw because they've never had those track meets before. And that would be like I don't even know how many schools have the capability to host a regional meet within your track region, but that would be on a rotating basis. So like every 3 or 4 years, they would have the opportunity to host it. So I just wanted to throw that out there, just because I know there's some questions about that. But I am concerned, obviously, about the redirection of the sound, because that's going to be redirected towards my location. So I hope that, there is some cooperation, to get that accomplished. And then I think you answered everything else. So thanks.
And everyone involved, I don't want you to walk away thinking I'm saying you can't ask questions. This just isn't the right forum for it. City council is, and Matt, and so that's the problem.
I'm gonna say something right there. Matt always says, and nothing against Matt, but Matt always says, this is a school project. So that's his, and
it is a school project, so I think that, you know, we don't have the opportunity with the school to have a discussion, and that open forum that they had, the whole community was not notified of that. There was very few people who showed up to that. I had plans, I couldn't make it. So respectfully, I understand what you're saying about addressing the MAC, but Matt always says it's a school project. So we're kind of like been given the runaround on that, I will say. So that's my 2 cents worth.
All right, thank you. We're gonna move on to our next agenda item, which is review of section 5 of the regulations applicable to all districts. We're gonna talk about conditional and restricted uses, as well as section 7 of the zoning ordinance, which is the subdivision procedures. You're welcome to stay, or if you would like to leave, you're welcome to do that.
Good evening. I am Elisa Duffy Rogers with CT Consultants, and with me this evening is Robert Seitzinger, who's also with CT. And thank you so much for having us here. Tonight, we will quickly run through the zoning ordinance update process. We will review the changes to the existing subdivision regulations and the newly created conditional and specific use regulations, and we will end with next steps. I will stop several times during this presentation to answer questions and to hear from community members. The zoning ordinance update is progressing in roughly 4 stages. The first phase included an analysis of the existing conditions, as well as a thorough examination of the existing zoning and subdivision ordinance. At the end of phase 1, we did produce a diagnostic report of our findings and recommendations, and that is available on the city's website. Phase 2 includes creating the revised regulations. The major changes from your current code are being fleshed out, and we are concluding phase 2 tonight. In phase 3, we will complete all amendments and align the zoning map with the new zoning regulations and districts. And we anticipate starting phase 3 in January. And then phase 4 is adoption of the new zoning ordinance and the map. We added additional opportunities for community members to discuss the proposed changes and to ask questions. On Thursdays after the Planning Commission meeting, we hold coffees and conversations at Fort Thomas Coffee from 10 to 11:45 a.m. and from 6 to 8 p.m. Please feel free to drop in during those hours and ask questions and have this conversation. At the Planning Commission meeting the following month, I report out to the Planning Commission the concerns and questions that were expressed during the coffee and conversation sessions. The sessions tomorrow will be our final ones for this year. We won't have any more sessions until we begin phase 3 in January. At the public sessions in August, we had 5 community members, and we discussed the lighting concerns, specifically the adequacy of the existing lighting regulations, especially when abutting residential neighborhoods with parking facilities, how best to light parking lots when they are adjacent to residential uses, and the environmental concerns and consideration of too much lighting. We also talked about the draft text and map for the Central Business District and the sub-districts for Midway and Town Center. We talked about home occupations and the appropriate way to regulate them, especially given the prevalence of remote working. We talked about accessory dwelling units and the possible negative consequences of permitting accessory dwelling units. We talked about the desirability of permitting shop houses in the Central Business District, and concerns were expressed about this use. We talked about a possible new single-family subdivision in the vicinity of the Highlands High School soccer field, and we talked about the existing and proposed regulations for temporary signs. As we talked about some time ago, we are creating a Unified Development Ordinance, or a UDO. A UDO has both the zoning ordinance and the subdivision ordinance in one document. Today, Fort Thomas has 2 standalone ordinances. One is the zoning ordinance and one is the subdivision ordinance. The UDO pulls all of these ordinances into one document for the ease of use. The UDO will make use of a common set of definitions, which prevents, for example, the same word from being defined one way in the zoning ordinance and a different way in the zoning ordinance. And so turning over to the subdivision regulations, which is where we're going to start this evening. Subdivision regulations govern the subdividing or the subdivision of parcels. Subdivision regulations, by their very nature, are extremely process or procedure oriented and extremely technical. They contain engineering standards and drawings and details of drawings for constructing public improvements within subdivisions. The existing subdivision ordinance regulations were created in 1990, and no major changes have occurred since that time. Because Fort Thomas's subdivision regulations have not been updated in many years, and engineering standards have changed in the intervening years, many of the revisions that you see in the draft text before you consist of these needed engineering modifications. The UDO will have Article 7, which will contain all the sections for the subdivision regulations. The subdivision regulations include all of the elements required by KRS 100. These include definitions and procedures for considering plats, the application requirements for plats, the standard and common elements for subdivisions such as lots and blocks and flood hazards, engineering standards for streets and stormwater management, and erosion and sediment control. So starting to move through the draft language that is in front of you, we kept much of what is in your current subdivision regulations with the exception of updating many of the engineering standards. Section 7.0 lays out Fort Thomas's authority for utilizing the subdivision regulations, and we only made minor grammatical changes and changes for current technology and terminology. In this section and throughout Article 7, we corrected all the code sections to reflect the new organization of UDO. In Section 7.1, we eliminated many of the definitions because these definitions will be consolidated into the definition section for the UDO. The existing subdivision regulations only define a subdivision, but they don't define a major subdivision or a minor subdivision. Defining these terms has process implications for the subdivision regulations, but also for the zoning requirements. For right now, let's hold off considering the connection with the zoning requirements and focus on the subdivision definitions and process. And when we return to the zoning requirements in phase 3, we can tweak this relationship or use other methods to ensure that the desired outcomes and that connection between the zoning regulations and the subdivision regulations is realized. One possible way to define these terms is to say that a major subdivision is one that contains public infrastructure improvements, like the construction of a public street or storm sewers and those kinds of things. Whereas a minor subdivision is the subdivision of land that does not contain public infrastructure improvements. A typical minor subdivision is something like a lot line adjustment. It is very common for property owners to want to adjust the lot line between them for things like to legitimize a driveway or a fence that is in an improper location, so they adjust the lot line. Some community members also restrict minor subdivisions to a limited number of lots. For example, to be classified as a minor subdivision, no more than 5 lots may be created, including the residual parcel. Before we discuss the definitions for major and minor subdivisions, let's talk a little bit about subdivision procedures. So before I go on to that, anything raise a red flag with y'all? Okay. So as I started this presentation out with, this is a highly technical, process-oriented document. So forgive me for just sort of feeling like I'm droning on. But by the nature of subdivision regulations, there's a lot of droning on. Section 7.2 includes the procedures for subdivisions. Let's start with the process for a major subdivision that is shown on the screen, no matter how we ultimately end up defining that term. It is a 2-step process that requires the Planning Commission to review and approve a preliminary plat, then a final plat, which is what we were talking about with the Dre subdivision earlier. A preliminary plat is a more conceptual version of how the existing parcel will be divided and does not entitle the subdivider to sell any of the lots. What the approval of a preliminary plat does do is it allows the subdivider to begin preparing improvement plans. So plans for streets, storm sewers, those sorts of things. It also allows it to be reviewed and considered by an appropriate entity such as Sanitation District Number 1. Following either the construction of the improvements or a bond to ensure their construction, the final plat is then reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission. Once the Planning Commission approves the final plat, the plat is recorded with the county and the subdivider may sell lots. The Decisions on subdivisions are administrative or ministerial, meaning essentially if the proposed subdivision meets all the rules, the planning commission has no authority to deny it. And when I say rules, I mean rules and subdivision regulations and the applicable zoning regulations, such as lot area and lot width. In your current subdivision regulations, a minor subdivision is called an identification plat. The procedures for a minor subdivision only requires the subdivider to come before you one time, as opposed to having a preliminary plat and a final plat. The abbreviated process is permitted because the proposed change to the existing lot lines is minor, and again, no public improvements are required. As I just said, a minor subdivision is often just adjusting lot lines, and again, never includes public improvements. For a minor subdivision, the applicant presents the identification plat to the planning commission. If the plat is approved, the plat can then be recorded with the county. In the current subdivision regulations, to use this abbreviated one-step process for an identification plat, the subdivision can't involve the construction of any public improvements. No more than 2 lots may be created. The lot lines can't be adjusted involving more than 3 lots. And if a preliminary plat has been approved at some point in the past, an identification plat can't be used. So these are the standards by which we judge whether or not someone can use this one-step process, and they're currently in your ordinance. These requirements or qualifiers are not required by KRS 100. They were policy choices that were made by the city at the time the ordinance was adopted in 1990. For a little bit of context, in Kenton County, they define a minor subdivision as one that does not require public improvements, and in all situations you can use the abbreviated one-step process if that's the case. In Campbell County, to use the shortened process, only 5 buildable lots are permitted and no public improvements. So the question, our first discussion question is, are these requirements to use this one-step process still applicable today?
I would think so. We have so few places where you could do a subdivision that it's not going to create a large burden for the planning commission to look at more than Campbell or Kent County look at.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, Mark, if you wanted to say anything, but my recollection of my time on the planning commission is we've had a situation where we have an identification plat. Rarely is it more than 2 or 3 lots. I honestly can't remember in the past 20 years where there's been 5 lots involved in a scenario like that.
You can't now.
Without public improvement. Well, I know, but I'm just saying, even if there was even the opportunity for something in that kind of scenario without some type of public improvements, infrastructure improvements. So I'm not aware that we've ever really had any issue or debate about that. So I don't necessarily see a need to change it significantly.
It still requires a public hearing, right?
No, it does not.
It does not.
Neither.
Well, it's not a public hearing, but it's, they have to still come to planning commission.
They have to come to the planning commission. It has to be a public meeting, but there are no requirements either in KRS 100 or in your current ordinance for it to be a public hearing. The only thing, if you want to keep these standards, I would say the only thing I would recommend is that if you look at number 2, it says no more than 2 lots, including the residual parcel, may be subdivided from the original tract of land existing prior to 1966. So where that existing prior to 1966 came from, as you probably all know, that's when you were allowed to then have subdivision regulations. I don't know that last phrase is important. I think if you want to look at anything that's no more than 2 lots, including the residual parcel, that's important. But whether or not it has been divided since 1966 is probably immaterial. Okay. So other than that slight change, then we want to keep your existing qualifiers for, okay. So now that we've thought about the process for subdivisions, let's return to the definition questions. As I said, generally speaking, it is the best practice to have these terms defined, especially when they relate to a development process. So right now, you talk about a subdivision is defined, an identification plan is not defined, a major subdivision is not defined, a minor subdivision is not defined. And essentially, identification plat and a minor subdivision are synonymous terms. So my question to you is, first of all, is it necessary to define a major and minor? And if so, are these definitions appropriate? And again, we can still say in order to use the minor subdivision process, you have to use those the qualifiers we just talked about.
What would be the argument against setting those definitions there?
I don't think there is any argument against it. I think it's just it just clarifies the language and makes it very clear to the person who's reading the ordinance that what is a major, what is a minor. The only issue is many communities will say, when they're talking about the minor subdivision, they will limit it to a certain number of lots. But we've already done that by the slide previous to that. So essentially, this just memorializes.
The only question I have is where we say public infrastructure improvements for the construction of a public or a private street. I mean, we have public and private intermixed there. Does it make sense just to say contains infrastructure improvements for the construction of a public or private street? Or do we even say public or private street?
We can just end it before the conjunction. Because the public infrastructure.
Because not always is public infrastructure. If they decide to keep them privately owned and maintained, they can do that.
Correct.
So does that then qualify them as a minor subdivision?
Let me rephrase that so we don't end up in that situation. Either way, you still wouldn't end up in that situation where they would only have a one-step process because they wouldn't be able to meet the qualifiers from the previous slide. But let me clarify that and recorrect and make that definition a little more clear in the next phase.
It's just a public-private part.
Exactly, yeah. Okay.
I know what the intent is. It's just,
yeah.
You know.
But I mean, the whole point of this process is to clean up our definitions, and if we can, let's don't make them any more convoluted through the process. Okay. All right. So with that minor change to the definition of major subdivision, are y'all okay with it? Okay. So section 7.3 and 7.4 list the submittal requirements for preliminary and final plats. Only minor changes have been made to these sections. We've updated code sections and made some edits to reflect current practices like electronic submittals. Section 7.5 becomes much more technical and includes details like required right-of-way widths and site distance requirements. And Robert updated all of the tables in this section as well as the illustrations.
The only thing I'd say, and I haven't looked at any of that obviously, but I think one thing we want to make sure we take into consideration is the access board passed their requirements for ADA, well not ADA compliance, but for handicap accessibility and public right of way on OSB 8. So we just need to make sure that those requirements that were just essentially released, even if they have technically been adopted by the DOT and by KYTC yet, they will be next year. To make sure that they're incorporated into the pedestrian ways, public improvements.
Robert, will you handle that? Awesome, thank you. As I said previously, subdivision regulations are highly technical and engineering focused, but there is one detail that we should discuss. Table 4 is essentially your existing table, and what Robert did was just formatted a little differently. As you will notice, the current requirement for pavement width is 25 feet. The width of pavement is actually a defining characteristic for a community. If you look at many of your older streets, they are not, the pavement width is not 25 feet. And so what I was suggesting is that we reduce that to 24. But before that change is finalized, I wanted to make sure y'all were okay with that.
think at some degree it matters if there's a shoulder or not a shoulder, and what type of curving you have to some degree too. I mean, I've seen other communities go down to 11 feet minimum length, but if there's a shoulder, a gutter pan.
We are requiring, if I'm wrong, tell me, curb and gutter.
Yes.
Roll curb or?
So for any residential section, it would be a rolled curb, which is what we see right now. Canton County and Campbell County recently, they approved a different type of curb. It's a sloped curb, but there's other communities that are still using the rolled curb, which has been typical that you see around here. Anywhere that you are in a commercial or industrial section, then it would be your standard box curb. That's kind of the two different curb sections that you'd have. But yes, any new improvements would need to have curbway.
So is there your 25 feet face to face with curb, or is that?
So that is back to back.
Back to back.
And you can also see there is still a section there that is defined as courts, which are very few lots that are in that has a minimum of 22 foot. So if the street is only serving less than 7 lots, then you could be down to the 11 foot lane width that you were discussing earlier. So.
Okay with the change?
And we had a requirement, I think, if I remember right, it's been a while. Do we require only a sidewalk on one side of the street?
So you'll see in here where, so there are indications on whether you're required to have a sidewalk on one side or on both sides. So for this particular case, the only instance that you would have sidewalk on just one side would be along those courts, the ones that are serving 7 lots or under. All your other ones would need to have sidewalk on both sides.
In this section, we did add a provision regarding the shape of lots, and this provision encourages rectangular lots and discourages irregularly shaped lots. Section 7.6 mandates the design standards for public improvements necessary in a major subdivision. Robert, again, rewrote all of these to incorporate sanitation district number 1 and to update the engineering standards.
I know one thing that I've experienced actually is, and I don't know, like I said, I haven't reviewed your draft as far as the requirement for roof drains.
Yeah.
I know that in my subdivision, most of the roof drains are tied into the storm sewer network. And SD1 actually requested that the homeowners remove the roof drains.
Yes.
Which I subsequently did.
Yeah.
Then my next door neighbor actually filed a complaint with the city because I did that.
Yes.
Citing the subdivision regulations.
Yes.
I mentioned that to SD1, and they said in the future they would like to see the city of Fort Thomas resolve that issue.
Yes. Yes.
So I was curious if we have resolved that issue.
I believe so. Pretty much the entirety of the stormwater management section pretty much got rewritten for this. The way that it was rewritten was actually similar to a couple of the other communities that we've recently done for Northern Kentucky. Similar case. Also utilized some of the wording from recent Kenton County. They updated theirs in 2015. We were part of PDS's group on that to essentially come up with a brand new subdivision regulation that is kind of the standard for the area now. So part of those regulations were incorporated into this, but then also with some other modifications that we had done with the city of Alexandria to kind of resolve similar type of issues.
So would you permit a roof drain not to be tied to a storm sewer system?
Yes.
Do you
say how close to a property line it can discharge? We had huge issues with this in Boone County. We ended up having to be really explicit about, you know, how close to a property line it can discharge, and then people that move in and they pipe it anyhow. And,
Yes.
I mean, we have lots of problems.
That there are, that there is wording on that. I can't speak off the top of my head as to what those distances are, but it does indicate that you do have to release it a certain distance away from it.
It says at least 5 feet from the residence. It doesn't say anything about the property line.
Okay.
20 feet from the edge of the pavement, the back curb, if you discharge it towards the street.
Yeah.
I don't see anything about distance between property line and the rear yard.
Okay.
Which would be a good thing.
Yeah, we can definitely take a little bit closer at that.
So the final section is for administration and enforcement. In terms of changes to this section, we eliminated those subsections that are no longer needed since the subdivision ordinance will be part of the UDO, and made other minor edits, and we left intact your ability to make modifications.
Do we define what the fees are for plats and plans in the ordinance?
So we are, as a matter of course, throughout this ordinance, putting a reference in that says the adopted fee schedule for the city of Fort Thomas, so that we are not limiting ourselves by what's in the ordinance. So that change was made as well. Robert also revised all the engineering details for pavement designs and streets and sidewalks, driveways, and everything that you see in the appendix.
And those details, those were all based on the details that PDS and the whole group that PDS had working on came up with. So this matches up fairly closely to the Kenton County subdivision regulation standard details in Campbell County. That the one exception I would say is the rolled curb versus the slope curb that Campbell and Kenton are using, but City of these are the same as City of Alexandria, who's still also using the rolled curb, just as kind of a point of reference.
In the section where you talk about the geotechnical investigation or any of the other subdivision regulations, do you cross-reference the hillside development control section of the ordinance?
It does not go back to that. The geotechnical portion of it is focused on, I'm not sure how to best describe it, but no, we did not refer back to the hillside management portion of it, but we certainly could add some.
I think there probably should be some level of cross-reference.
Yeah. With it talks some about maximum slopes and fill and cut slopes on that, which are referenced within our hillside ordinance stuff, but it doesn't specifically call back to it. But yes, I agree that might be beneficial for this particular area.
I don't see any details on curb ramps or truncated cone sections
So-
or anything like that.
So with the ADA details, those are not included within that just because of modifications to ADA regulations. We don't want to have something in there that specifically says that this is how that should be, and then ADA regulation changes, and then someone goes back to the standard details and says this is that.
So do you refer to the latest edition of this?
Yes. It refers to the latest ADA accessibility guidelines.
And like I said, the access board is an office.
Yes, the revised, yes.
One thing that, and I don't know if this, like I said, I haven't looked at your regulations. The one thing that we noticed at our firm is that the crosswalk crossload now can be a maximum of 2% in the street. So
yeah.
the street geometry has to meet the sidewalk, not the other way around.
Yeah, well, there's been some new changes to it that, kind of impact a lot of those, specifically before regulations did have some that were, you did have to meet that 2%, but then there were other cases where you didn't have to, and but, as you mentioned, they keep changing it.
If it's a signalized or
Yes.
opposition.
Correct.
You have to have a 2% crosswalk
Yeah.
on the street profile.
Yes. For mid-block crossings, I believe those are still, street, yeah, exactly.
Any other planning commission comments before we open it up to the community?
Are there any comments or questions?
I have a really easy question, and it may very well be my mistake, but for clarification, I believe that I heard you say, Elisa, that a preliminary, I'm maybe using the wrong term, preliminary plat vote at a planning board commission only needs to be, the preliminary needs to be improved, not the final. Did you say something similar to that?
No, so if it's a situation where it's a major subdivision and it can't be an identification plat, it's a preliminary plat and then a final plat, both come before the planning commission and both have to be approved by the planning commission.
Okay, I thought that you said that by law, only preliminary had to be.
No, what I was talking about was it's an administrative or a ministerial act. So as long as they meet the standards, then the planning commission does not have the discretion to deny it.
I misheard that.
Oh,
Thank
no
you.
problem.
Does that not go to city council to the planning commission as the final?
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah. The planning commission is the final actor, with the exception that as the subdivision ordinance are currently written, the city council has to accept the improvements, but that is it.
That'll still be the case.
Actually not.
So who does make the determination of the acceptance of the improvement?
So there are two issues there, right? There is the acceptance of the right-of-way, and then there are the exception, that the improvements have been constructed according to plan. So the acceptance of the right-of-way is now an operation of law that happens when you sign the plat as the chair of the planning commission. And then in terms of the improvements being accepted, that happens either by us or by whomever the improvement goes to. So if it's SD1 or whatever else.
Right, but if it's an improvement that the city's gonna maintain, how does that happen procedurally?
So procedurally, if it's constructed, then we go out and inspect it and make sure that it meets all of the plans and all of our standards. And at that point, if it meets those standards, then it can be accepted.
Well, as I'm saying, is it a letter from the administration saying we accept?
Yes, I think that's how it will ultimately play out, but we have not made that final decision at this point. Robert, do you want to add anything?
And I guess there is, like I was mentioning earlier, but if a developer would choose to keep the improvements private for their own maintenance, then we still inspect them with conformance with the subdivision regulations, but we are not accepting.
Correct. Correct.
That's what essentially happened in planning board, right?
Yes.
I was on planning commission and I would have done totally different than.
Any other comments about the subdivision regulations? So we will now turn to the conditional use and restricted use regulations. We have been reviewing all of the permitted uses in each of the zoning districts and deciding what uses should have additional requirements or standards and which uses need the discretionary review of a conditional use. Your packet for tonight has all of the standards for both the restricted and the conditional uses, and we will briefly review some of the standards for some of the selective uses. Because the organizing principle or foundation of conventional zoning districts is land uses are classified into different categories in each zoning district, whether it is a single-family detached district or a commercial district. Permitted uses are always administratively allowed if the permitted use meets all the applicable standards in the zoning ordinance. Many municipalities call these uses permitted by right, meaning that there's no special hearing or procedure required to gain approval. Uses, for example, a single-family home would be a permitted use in a single-family zoning district. Uses permitted by right must be approved if the use and the associated improvements comply with the zoning ordinance, as I've said. A conditional use is a use that has unique impacts and that requires special attention. A conditional use is a use that is permitted subject to compliance with a set of conditions and criteria and that are all set out in the zoning ordinance. And the conditions really are designed to ensure that the use is in harmony with the purpose of the zoning district as well as the surrounding neighborhood. What you will notice as we've talked about these things throughout is that we are allowing an additional type of use that falls between a permitted use and a conditional use, and that is the restricted use. And as the code's currently drafted, these are uses that are basically permitted by right, but there is a defined set of standards within the code that we will be talking about tonight. If they can't meet those standards for whatever reason, it then becomes a conditional use. Given that we have decided that some uses require more care, Section 5.4 establishes standards for specific uses. In some cases, they are just supplemental standards. They are standards above and beyond what's in the zoning district. In other cases, they are alternative standards which deviate from the standards in the applicable zoning district. There are restricted use and conditional use standards in all of the zoning districts, and to remind you of those zoning districts, let's go through them briefly. We have 7 single-family districts, 1 two-family district, and 2 multifamily districts. We have 2 other districts that are special purposes. Those are the River Preservation and the Conservation District. We have 3 business and mixed-use districts that are outside of the Central Business District. Those are the Traditional Business District, which is Inverness, the Alexandria Pike Mixed-Use District, and the Neighborhood Commercial Office District.
Didn't we used to have a little section of industrial park?
So yes, and that is being done away with, and it will be merged into the Alexandria Pike. And I'll show you that map in just a second. Let's look quickly at a few maps to orient ourselves, since location is an important factor when we're talking about regulations for restricted and conditional uses. This is the existing zoning map. The maroon that runs along the river is the River Preservation District. The dark green is the R1AA. The slightly lighter green is R1B, and the dark brown that you see is the R1C zoning district. The R1A is the light brown that you see, and the multifamily districts, the purple is R3, and the darker blue is R5. To refresh everyone's memory about where the Alexandria Pike Mixed-Use District applies, the Mixed-Use District replaces the general commercial, the highway commercial, the professional office, and the industrial park districts that Jerry was just mentioning. The district does not alter or affect the zoning for the homes along Alexandria Pike, which will remain R1C. What you see on the map is the southern portion of the district, and all of these parcels are currently zoned general commercial or professional office. The northern part of the district is what you see. If you see the parcel, Jerry, that has sort of a cutout in it, that's what was formerly the industrial park district, and that's where Marsh Products is. Yep, that's it. And then it extends all the way up to basically the package store, all the way up to 471, and then includes the office that's at the corner of Alexandria Pike and Fort, a little further south. It has those professional offices as well, and then that corner as well. So that is the northern portion of the Alexandria Pike Mixed-Use District. Unlike the other business and mixed-use districts, the Neighborhood Commercial Office District is not place-based. We will talk about this district as it relates to Fort Thomas Avenue and Bivouac Avenue in a few minutes. This district is being used at Fort Thomas Plaza, the commercial office area at Highland and Grand, and the small set parcel at Bivouac and South Fort Thomas. Based on our conversations in July, the traditional business district will encompass much of the area currently zoned general commercial, At that meeting, we decided to retain the dwellings next to the barber shop in the district, and we will briefly discuss of how those homes should be zoned and what the uses and standards will be tonight. We do have two central business districts, both of which have sub-districts. They are the Town Center and the Midway Central Business District. So for the Town Center CBD, which is downtown, we have three sub-districts. The purple is the core, which encompasses the traditional business area for downtown. The supporting subzone is Aqua, and it goes from Highland to Montville and from Shone to Forest Avenue. And that's a change from what we looked at in July, because the post office and the banks at that point were part of the core, and now they're being part of the supporting area. And then the orange are the homes on Miller and Lumley and Audubon Place. And then also to reflect what we talked about in July, the home that fronts on Forest Avenue has been removed from the district. The Midway Central Business District has 5 subzones. The core 1 is purple, core 2 is aqua, and core 3 is gray, and that encompasses the Cincinnati Bell property on the north end of the district. There are 2 residential subzones. Residential 1 is Midway Court, and the 5 narrower houses that front on Fort Thomas Avenue. And I'll remind you that we've sort of placed into let's talk about it later subject, the future for Midway Court. Residential 2 is the homes on Southview, Grandview, Garrison, Shawnee, and Brentwood.
What did we decide to do with the VA property?
So based on the conversations that we've had here and subsequently, it has been removed from consideration at this point and will continue to be zoned R1C. So let's turn to the chart in section 5.4. Because these regulations include all zoning districts as well as both the restricted and conditional uses, I included this chart that lists all the uses and indicates which zoning district they're in and whether they're a conditional use or a restricted use. We are not going to review every single solitary use tonight because there are 54 of them. If you have questions or concerns about the standards for a specific use, please speak up now or email me about it, but it's just really not time to go through the standards for every particular use tonight. As I mentioned before, we reviewed the relevant maps. Location is a key component of the standards for restricted and conditional uses. Please keep in mind that restricted uses are uses permitted by right with additional standards, whereas a conditional use is a discretionary review that has to go to the Board of Adjustment in Kentucky. In some cases, the standards that you see tonight attempt to mitigate certain aspects of a use, or in other situations, we wanted to limit the type of structure that was appropriate in a particular location. In this portion of the table, there are uses ranging from agricultural to congregate care facilities. In some cases, we retain your existing standards, such as the standards for agricultural uses that you currently have in the R1AA, the River Preservation District, and in the Conservation Districts. In the case of the congregate care facilities and the traditional business district, we require that the use is only permitted in buildings that exist at the time that these ordinance amendments are adopted. And this inclusion states that we think that congregate care, for example, would be a good reuse of some of those existing buildings. And so that's why that restriction is put in place and put it in phrased that way.
We have issues sometimes with the building code that some use just doesn't fit in. And even though we have 54 different uses, I mean, we had issues with the indoor paintball.
Right.
What is it? And so is there something in here that says can you find the closest thing?
So we have a similar use determination that is included in the code. So for example, indoor paintball, or a few years ago it was paint and drink wine and those kinds of things. Like, where does that fit? Because let's just be honest, some use is going to be, that's going to come down the pike that we're not going to know about. And so there is a similar loose authority in the zoning ordinance. For some uses like daycare centers and funeral homes, again, we retain the development standards that's currently in your zoning ordinance and added to those standards to better fit these uses into residential districts. For the light manufacturing, which is currently a restricted use in the Alexandria Pike District, We actually required a larger minimum lot area for this use than the other uses in the district, and we increased the screening in order to buffer this use from all of the surrounding neighborhoods. For several uses like pleasure boat harbors and boat launching facilities and recreational dockage facilities that are permitted in your river preservation district as a conditional use today, we again retained those standards that are there, but we added additional standards to them to make them more fitting. Things like we required that certain unsightly uses be inside a building, or things like you can't have any outdoor storage. Those are the types of standards that we have added above and beyond your current development standards for these uses. We conclude this table with vehicle sales and rental facilities. This use is conditionally permitted in the neighborhood commercial office district. As you may recall, when we discussed that, we talked about how to deal with the existing auto dealership that was there and whether or not to exempt them from certain standards. And y'all ultimately decided that that's something that you wanted to do, for example, allowing the front yard parking. So those permissions are now built into these standards. So let's talk about the corner of Bivouac and South Fort Thomas. This site is unusual because it is a non-residential use surrounded by single-family detached homes. It is an island of a business activity in this area. And just to give you a little bit of context, it's about a half an acre and it's currently zoned professional office. Rather than create a zoning district specific for this one parcel, we opted to use the neighborhood commercial office district, but to restrict the permitted uses and to do that using the restricted use standards. So that in order to make the uses that would be appropriate on this site fit in. So rather than create a whole new district, we just said we're going to have locational requirements that will constrain what can go on this site. So the uses that you see on the screen are generally permitted in the neighborhood commercial office district, and they range from brew pubs to hotels. But then this restriction that is currently drafted says, when these facilities shall not be located on a corner lot with frontage on a local public street that has a public right-of-way owned and maintained by the city of Fort Thomas. So that prevents these uses from going on that corner. So it's somewhat of an unusual approach, but again, rather than creating a whole zoning district for one lot, that's how we have constrained so that what goes on this lot is more professional office and those types of things. We're not permitting restaurants, that sort of thing. So are you, or brew pubs I should say, are you okay with this approach? Any concerns about it?
So what can go in there by right?
So it would be professional office, those kinds of things would be something that could go in there. As opposed to artisan industrial, assembly halls, brew pubs, any of those things that are more intense would not be allowed to go there. So medical would not be permitted.
Because that used to be there.
That used to be there, and I know that. And we certainly can change that. I mean, if you feel comfortable allowing a medical use there, which I think is what the building was originally used for. Yeah, so I mean, we certainly can pick and choose which of these uses you think that restriction should apply to. But these were the ones that, based on sort of the concerns that I've heard from community members, because this lot comes up a lot in community conversation, that I thought we needed to make sure that we prohibited the intensive use on this site. So the first question would be, are you okay with this approach? And if so, prohibiting these uses, is that okay? Or do we need to allow medical office or whatever else?
Are we potentially taking property from them by restricting them at this point?
No. As long as we give them some usable use on their property, we are not taking it. Professional office today. Yeah. Yeah.
But these would have been allowed in the professional office?
The only thing that would have been allowed in the professional office would have been the medical dental clinic. Would be the only thing that they are losing.
And the reason you take that out is because it's much more intensive use.
It's a much more intensive use. Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of coming and going, lots of intensity on this site.
What was the purpose of the community center was the same thing, too many people coming?
Right, exactly. And again, I mean, this is a draft list. We can change it.
I guess I have concern about taking away something that they could have done or they have done in the past. So that the medical, dental, and I'm not familiar with what was there 10 years ago or 20 years ago. But if it was, I guess I have some concern about taking that use away from them.
You don't have little standalone doctor's offices anymore like they
For the
used to.
most part.
But you
Except-
do still have dental.
Dental,
offices that
definitely.
are standalone businesses.
And we have quite a few in Fort Thomas, so it would be a good space for another one.
Right. So right now, the term is defined together. But I could make that work. I could not allow medical and allow dental, if that would give you some comfort.
Okay. Because urgent care wouldn't be a good place.
No. And as you said, the standalone sole practitioner doctor really doesn't exist anymore. But allow dentists. Okay. Okay. And again, I mean, this is, while we are ending phase 2 tonight, this is not the end all be all. And I'll say this again in a few minutes. You know, what happens at phase 3 is that you're going to have one complete document. So right now you have looked at all of this in sections. And so all the connections may not be readily apparent. And then certainly we have changed. It's been an iterative process throughout this. So when we pull it together in section in phase 3, that may help make all of this make sense. But just because we're in phase 3 doesn't mean we can't make changes. So let's turn to the existing single-family uses or structures in both downtown and Inverness. When we discussed the traditional business district, which is the zoning district for Inverness, we discussed continuing to have the homes that are on the north end right next to the barber shop. And what you said was to put them in as I understood it, to put them in the district and make them conforming. We did not discuss whether we wanted to make them conforming either as a permitted use or a restricted use. If we make these homes a permitted use, we are essentially saying that homes are appropriate in this location. Whereas if we make them a restricted use, what we are saying is that these homes exist. We want them to be a conforming use, but we would be okay if it was replaced by a business, by some non-residential use. So my question to you is, should those homes next to the barbershop be permitted or restricted in Inverness?
I think one of our main goals was to allow people that are in non-conforming houses now to be able to get loans from banks and things.
Correct.
So if we can still do that with a restricted use, I would think restricted use would be the way to go.
You can.
I've got one question. If somebody wanted to add on and they needed to get financing to add on to one of those properties, that would be a problem for them, right?
No, not as restricted use, because what the restriction says is it has to exist the day the ordinance goes into effect. Even enlarging, we're not in any way constraining their ability to enlarge it, because that's essentially the problem they have today. They can't enlarge it because it's non-conforming. So yes, they can do whatever they want, but as long as it meets the setback requirements, those kinds of things, by adding on to it or whatever. So they can get mortgages, they can get insurance, those kinds of things if it's restricted.
Are you talking just Inverness, or are you talking the one on the left-hand side too?
We're going to get to that one. Right now, I'm bifurcating the conversation.
But if they do change to a commercial use, then they have buffering and screening kind of requirements.
Not really, because they're in the central business district, the buffer and screening is not required. To the adjacent residential, right. It is not. Correct. If it's on the border, it would be. So for,
Yeah, that's what I mean.
yeah, so the northernmost one would have to. But the one right next to Smitty's, and then the one next to it would not have to because it's in the central business district.
Or somebody combine the lots.
Right, yeah, exactly. So make it a restricted use? Okay. And so it's the same question for the residential buildings that are on North Fort Thomas that go from the Masonic Lodge to Fifth Third Bank. Do we want them to be P or R? So make them R. And so that's how it's currently drafted, and it just basically says if it exists, the day the ordinance passes, is it permitted? So over the next few slides, I will briefly review some conditional use and restricted use standards for a few uses. Am I going away?
Yeah, up and down. You're out of time.
We'll fill in.
That was her.
I'll cede my time to you.
I was just being funny.
Is that better?
Yes.
Okay, so I just turned it on and off again. Okay. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. As you will recall, shop houses and other live-work uses are permitted use for the homes that are in the residential subzones in both Midway and Town Center. In most cases, these shop houses or live-work uses are restricted uses and are subject to very strict regulations. I do want to point out to you that the 5 narrow homes that are on South Fort Thomas in the Midway would be allowed to have a shop house as a permitted use and would not be subject to these standards. So these only apply in the areas where it are in the Town Center residential and in the residential area of Midway and then in the traditional business district that we were just talking about. So in terms of the restricted use standards for shop houses as it's currently drafted, the work portion would have to occupy less than 50% of the dwelling unit's gross floor area. The occupant of the dwelling unit would have to own the business. Only one employee. The residential appearance of the dwelling unit could not be altered. There has to be common access for the live workspaces, meaning no designated entrance for the work or non-residential portion of the use. There is no outdoor display or storage. There's a limited range of uses. It is things like professional office, but no medical office. The signage is limited to 4 square feet. And then they must also submit an application that describes what their work uses will be. And finally, they must have the occupational license. And so these are the restricted standards for those homes that, for example, are on Miller and Lumley and those kinds of things, if they decide they want to do something like a shop house. Any concerns with these standards?
What kind of signage are they allowed? Signs, monument signs,
All we've limited to so far is 4 square feet, and I think it has to be in the window of the dwelling, if I remember correctly, how I phrased it.
I was just curious about your operate the business, so we're not requiring them to be the owner operator of the business, correct? Like if they're a franchisee or they work for a company, but they're operating out of that house.
Correct. We are not saying, yes, that they actually have to own the business. For example, if they're a franchisee, they could do that.
You're gonna be an employee of whatever, as long as they're operating out of that house.
Correct. So what we don't want is for it to be an absentee situation where someone is just using it for the work portion, but don't live there. So it has to truly be a live-work use.
Should it say owner of the dwelling instead of occupant of the dwelling?
Well, they could rent it, and they might not own it. Because we're not limiting this to owner occupied. They could rent it. But if that word gives you pause, I could try to come up with something else.
I was just trying to think of how that might be abused.
I can't think of anything.
I mean, you could have a situation where a company comes in and rents a house, puts their employee in there, or a rotating number of employees in there. Just kind of as a remote office, but it doesn't necessarily have to be isolated to the owner of the property.
But they still only have one employee.
Right.
So.
Still, yeah.
Yeah.
Which at the end of the day, I don't know that it really matters as far as that goes.
Right, exactly. So there are.
Whether they own the house or not, as long as somebody's occupying the house
And there's work portion of it.
they're having an office there.
Right, exactly.
So if the person operating it, are they allowed to have one employee or they are the employee?
They are allowed to have one employee, which is the key difference between this and a home occupation. Because a home occupation, you're not allowed to have any employees. Oh, and just for a little reference, the middle picture is actually a purpose-built live-work unit in South Carolina. as opposed to.
I was gonna say, that's not important.
It's just interesting, you know, in our situations, we're talking about reuse, but this is one that was actually purpose-built.
I like it.
As you can,
See the policies, it's South Carolina.
okay. I wanted to give you a glimpse into some of the conditional use regulations. These are for drive-through facilities. We have mandated a minimum lot size of 1 acre, which is an objective measure. But we have given the Board of Adjustment the discretion to require a traffic impact analysis and to limit the hours of operation and to evaluate the suitability of the loudspeaker. Unlike restricted regulations, the requirements for conditional use allow the BOA to evaluate the use, the place, and then to place appropriate conditions on it based on its location. So these are some of the, this is how it's differing from the restricted use. There's much more discretion involved as the BOA is reviewing these uses. Another example of conditional uses are those for daycare centers and residential districts. Today, as I've said, they are conditional uses in your residential district and you have development standards for them. We've retained those. We haven't changed any of the minimum lot area requirements or those kinds of things. And what you see on the screen are your existing minimum lot areas for daycare centers in residential districts. But we have added additional standards, things like regulating and saying that you have to have, your signage has to come before the BOA so that can be evaluated. The lighting has to be residential in character, and the applicant must demonstrate that the daycare center is compatible with surrounding uses. And then they also have to submit a description plan to the BOA so the BOA really fully understands what the daycare center is and the types of services that it's going to be operating from this particular residential location. So that's how we have supplemented your existing standards. Any concerns, anything you want to talk about in terms of the conditional use, restricted use standards before? Okay.
Does BOA know that we've given them some additional work to do?
So for example, the daycare center in residential districts is currently a conditional use. So all we have done is just add additional standards to them. So I don't know that we've given them more work. We've just given them more things to think about.
Okay.
Sounds like a work.
Is it okay if we? So do the community members have anything they would like to say about conditional use and restricted use regulations?
I did have one sort of comment. When you were talking about the top of bivouac,
Yes.
the one, well, two questions actually. You were going to remove urgent care and medical?
Actually, what the commission said was they wanted to allow like dental offices, but not medical and urgent care.
Okay. No, I understand that.
Okay.
That's what I was saying, but I mean, I know you said there's not very many, but my doctor happens to be one guy in the house that isn't associated with the hospitals. He's just, I mean, it does exist. He grew up here and is still practicing in Newport. He's young, he's young, maybe 60. So I don't know if you want to eliminate it. I definitely agree with eliminating the urgent care, because that can be a busy thing. It was just a comment. But my other comment on that was, you mentioned specifically about the roadway in front being maintained by the city. I don't know if it's owned by the city, if I'm not mistaken, and I very well could be. I think that's a state road. Does that make a difference?
So the qualifier is that it has to be on a corner lot,
Which it's not. Well,
which it
sort of
is, because it's at the corner of Bivouac and South Fort Thomas.
And the other street, Rossmore. The parking's on Rossmore.
Right. And on that corner, it has to be a local road, which is what Rossmore is. So that way we can qualify that the only thing that those restricted uses are restricting is that one lot.
Because the only part on the Rossmore side is parking.
But the lot has frontage on Rossmore. And that's the qualifier's frontage, not that it has,
But their address isn't Rossmore.
but that doesn't matter. It's still a corner, it's still a corner lot.
I just,
Yeah, with frontage on a
I
local road.
see the corner part being Rossmore. Bivouac is like at the top, but there's not a corner. I mean, there's not a road in between. You know what I'm saying? Like,
It's still a corner, definitionally it's still a corner.
There's not a corner of Bivouac.
Yes,
There is on
technically
the
there
other
is not a
side.
corner of Bivouac. It is South Fort Thomas and Rossmore. But it's, when we're talking about it,
That's
it's
fine.
easier.
I was more questioning the state route
Okay,
rather than the,
okay.
the city, and you explained it well. The city removes the snow, so I guess it's.
Yes, Ross Ward is a local road that the city owns and
I think the
maintains.
avenue gets.
The avenue is a Kentucky Transportation
Yes,
Capital
I
Road.
think the city plows the snow.
So we're getting close to a breaking point or?
Yes, we're taking community comments right now.
Yeah.
Oh, perfect.
That's it.
Can I comment?
I'm Peggy Maggio, 37 South Shaw Lane. I have a few questions and comments. A couple of things have changed since you guys met in July, and one of them is it was just this month that the full results of the community survey that were done in 2016 for the comprehensive plan were put on the actual website. They weren't there before, they had to go find them. But one of them that I wanted to bring to your attention, I'd like to ask you to reconsider the houses over here on the west side of the street, making that a permitted use, and I'll tell you why. In that community survey, one of the questions was restore and preserve the district's historic character. 72% of the respondents were in favor and 33% were at number 10. It went from 0 to 10. That west side of the street was historically residential. The way that Fort Thomas grew up was that the business district was on this east side of the street. The west side of the street were beautiful homes, 4 of which have now been raised, but those were all homes. And somewhere, Dave, you can, I know you're the historian here, so maybe you can help me out with this, but I'm thinking around 2000 or so, the decision was made to try to retrofit those homes into a business district that they've been trying to do now for 20 years. So since we have the majority of the respondents of this survey, and it's the only survey we have, saying that they would like to preserve the character that we have, it would certainly be nice, and I've heard interest on many people's behalf, that they would like to either restore those homes into homes, or would they would like to build new homes if they have to be torn down. If we look at that map that Elisa showed in the central business district where the turquoise is, for example, my understanding is if you would make that a restricted use, one of those homes right now next to Pendry, for example, is a mortgage company. So if that was a restricted use, that could never go back to being a single family?
It could.
It could.
Yes.
So maybe you can help me then understand the difference between a permitted use and a restricted use.
If the single family structure exists the day the ordinance is adopted, then it can go back. So the only thing, as I said, it's more an issue of tone than anything else. If we say it's a permitted use, we are saying it's appropriate in the district and we would want more of them, for example. If we say it's a restricted use, we say we understand these structures exist and we want to make them conforming, and we're just blessing what's already in place. And so what we're blessing is the structure, not the use.
So say, for example, that the mortgage company that's in that home next to Pendry would come down. That house would be torn down. Could another single family house go in that space?
No, not as a restricted use.
And so, and I'm also talking about the Fifth Third property right across the street here. If that was redeveloped, could that be developed into single family homes?
Not if it is a restricted use.
So I guess my point is that since we have the majority of the respondents of this survey, and it's the only survey we have, saying that we want to preserve the district's historic character, and historically, that whole side of the west side of the street were single family homes, I would ask you all to reconsider making single family homes a permitted use on the west side of the street. That's my question. You guys can discuss it and whatever. The next point that I have are the shop houses. There are only, to my understanding, Elisa, please correct me if I'm wrong, there are only 5, if we're going to, sorry, I've got it oriented here.
I think it's the orange.
Yeah, the orange, I'm sorry, the orange on Lemley and Miller, so that's 7. And I know at the Joint Planning Commission City Council meeting, you had made the decision to contact those owners and see what type of uses they wanted. My question is, where did this whole shop house concept come from? Is that something that they came to you with? Is that something that y'all came up with on your own? I mean, where is the shop house thing? Because I know I talked to one of the, I think it's 18 there or 22, watches my dogs for me. And when I stopped to pay them, they had no idea, A, they were in the central business district, but certainly not that shop houses were being proposed for their district. So I'm just wondering where the shop house concept came from and if these folks have been contacted as was agreed to at your joint meeting.
So the idea came from that once the planning commission and the council decided to retain them in the district, to allow that, but right now, for example, all of those homes on Lumley could be torn down and businesses could be put in.
Sure.
So if we suddenly say that they cannot have businesses in that location, we are taking away rights from them, much in the way that Tim was talking about
I understand
at Bivouac and Rossman.
So what happened when you guys contacted the 7 homeowners?
So my understanding from that meeting was Matt was saying that he would contact them if we took away those development rights. But since the planning commission and the council decided to leave them in the district and allow some limited non-residential use, he did not feel the need to contact them.
So my understanding was that you were going to contact them to find out if they wanted to stay in the district or not.
That was not my understanding of that meeting. Certainly I could have that conversation with Matt to see if that is something that he would like to do. That
Since
is his
there's
choice.
only 7
It's
houses.
those 7, it's also the ones on Audubon.
Which I know a house there, they had no idea they were in the central business district. So we're talking about then 10 houses.
And so then, for example, the house that is across the street in Audubon used to be a law office.
Right.
Those kinds of things. So there's those houses, there are the houses in the traditional business district, and then there are also the houses that are in Midway. So it's more than just, while it is true that it is limited within the town center area, there are more places where it is applicable.
So I'll just say, as a planning commission, do you all think that it's reasonable to contact these owners, maybe just in the central business district or in all of them, and tell them that these kinds of changes are being considered for their properties? And they can come and address you and let you know, or they can even say yay or nay, we like this or we don't like this.
We're not changing them. We're keeping them the same as what they have been.
Exactly, I understand that.
If we
but I think-
change, then they would be notified.
So I think the conversation was that, well, it is being changed, right? Because you're saying that it could be.
No, we're keeping it the same.
You're keeping it the same, but you're now restricting the uses. Because right now they could be any business and you're just making it shop house.
Right, but it's still commercial use.
Right. So would you guys be in favor of at least the people in the central business district knowing that they have the option not to be in the central business district?
Well, they could, I mean, essentially, they could, I think it's reasonable to ask Matt if he's had any contact with them. But if we were to change it to make it residential,
I understand
they would officially be notified, and they would have to petition the planning commission to effectively make that change.
To change it back, I mean, if you say.
To change it to something different.
But if
I
you notify them after it's been changed.
No, we're not changing anything.
No, but you said, but if we changed it, then
If we
notify.
changed it, they would be notified before we changed it.
Okay, you didn't mention before, that's
Right,
right.
they would have to approach us essentially, saying, we want to change our zoning, and then we would consider it.
But you all think it would be reasonable, then I think you're directing Elisa to ask Matt to contact those.
Well, I'm not asking her to contact, just asking.
No, asking to
what
talk to
his
Matt
opinion-
about it.
What his opinion is.
I'll talk about that too. Thanks, and I appreciate it. Just one other item I have tonight, and that is when we're talking about permitted and restricted uses. Another thing we did not know back in July is that in that survey that was sent out, there was a point blank question whether or not people were in favor or not of tearing down and redeveloping portions of the business districts to increase density. Only 36% of Fort Thomas respondents wanted to increase density in the central business district. Yet into the comprehensive plan went a major portion of that was to increase density. Back in July, you agreed to allow, and if we, Elisa, if you could pull up that map of the Midway, please. So since we're talking about restricted and permitted uses. My understanding is, and Elisa, correct me if I'm wrong, that all the purple, and I believe, again, correct me if I'm wrong, in the turquoise and the light purple. I'm sorry. I'm not getting the colors right. So I think it's in the turquoise and maybe plat 947. Is 947 the core 3?
What's the question, Peggy, and then we'll figure
So the
out.
question is, being that only 6% of people in Fort Thomas were in favor of increasing density in the business districts, are you all in favor of allowing all of that to have multifamily housing permitted by right? Because that's what I'm reading the standards to say.
So as it's currently drafted, the only place where you could do multifamily by right would be the turquoise.
Hang on for 1 second, let me just get this up here, so I brought it. So where I'm seeing multifamily permitted by right is CBD MC2 and CBD MC3.
And correct, you would be also allowed to do it on the Cincinnati Bell site.
So we're talking about, Fort Thomas is not in favor of increasing density, but yet we're talking about rezoning the whole Cincinnati Bell site to allow multifamily housing.
It is already allowing multifamily housing.
That does allow multifamily?
Yes, today it's R3.
Okay, so I guess then we decide whether or not we want to do that. But then are we, right now, all the stuff that's blue, does that right now allow multifamily housing?
It does not, because it is the central business district. It allows multifamily, but it has to have non-residential on the first floor.
So we're talking about the top of Brentwood, we're talking about Shawnee, Garrison, River Road, Southview, and Grandview, where Michelle Story is, where the Ameristop is, where not Best Furniture, but where Jean Pritchard is.
But you can have multifamily today, you would just have to have non-residential on the first floor. So that is
exactly. But
so
we're talking, when you're
would be-
talking about multifamily here, you're talking about a multifamily unit all the way down to the
Correct.
street.
So that is a policy change, but the density would only be different by allowing multifamily on the first floor than what is currently allowed.
I understand that. So since this is a policy change, and this is not a question for planning commission, it's a question for city council?
So we had that conversation with them back in June, and we talked specifically about where they wanted to require non-residential on the first floor, and that was in the purple area.
Back then, we didn't have this map though, right?
No, we had exactly this map.
Okay. So I'll address city council on that issue. Thank you.
Anybody else?
All right. Let me get. So as I said, tonight we conclude phase 2. We will start phase 3 in January. During phase 3, you will see the complete UDO with changes noted from the phase 2 text. There are still some fairly large policy items to discuss in phase 3. These include the future of Midway Court, the residential uses over non-residential uses along Alexandria Pike, and then the future of the strip center behind West Banco on Miller Lane. So those are some of the large things that will be happening in phase 3. And I will see you in November, but we will be talking about something besides zoning, but we are done with phase 2.
Wait, excuse me, before you adjourn, can you guys talk about making those houses on the west side a permitted versus a restricted use?
That's up to the chair.
I think we'll consider that as we move forward in the next phase of work. I mean, none of that.
You were the only one that said restricted and no one else piped up, so I just wanted to.
Well, I think that's what we just decided to leave it as it's currently drafted for now.
Okay.
But
I didn't
you know,
realize we were adjourning either, because I was just addressing what had been in the prior, but I did have a very brief statement, or a question actually. Can I do that?
If it's brief.
That's brief, that's
Okay.
short. For Jen, that's. Yeah, you know what I want. No,
Please,
but
it's
you
not.
do. It is brief.
It is brief.
Go
That's
for
what
it.
I'm saying. It is brief.
Let's do that. Go.
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm Joan Ferris. I live at 66 Bernie Lane. This afternoon, I learned that an updated file entitled Unified Development Ordinance was posted on the fortthomas.org website under Government, Boards and Commissions, Zoning Commission, September 2023 meeting material. My compliments to the fact that there was a logical path to find it if you knew to look for it, and I do think, however, that developed. The agenda link simply said coming soon, so I guess the agenda might be next week. My question is directed to each of the zoning board members and is very simple. In preparation for tonight's meeting, have you read and digested the 162-page PDF file, or read and digested at least the 80 pages that have been added since the August meeting material file was released? I'm not sure of the protocol, but I'm requesting a roll call response to this yes or no question, and that the responses are noted in the minutes. Thank you.
You don't have to answer, you can if you want.
Wow.
You know, that's not what the public meeting laws say. You're, well, let me finish, you talk. As a resident, you're permitted to get up, say what you want. It's not a question and answer session. If you want to answer, go ahead.
I will say that I have read it. I haven't read it word for word, but we do get the documents for the meeting emailed to each member ahead of the meeting for review.
I've studied the revisions. That's not the whole zoning ordinance, but you know, we get the revisions every meeting, and I look at those beforehand.
I'm not certain what the revisions are. Is this the summarized?
The proposed revisions to our existing ordinance.
The documents you just mentioned, like the stuff that was posted.
I haven't read the entire zoning ordinance. I probably have it. I probably did it sometime, but no, I studied the revisions to that. The proposed revisions to the zoning ordinance.
Yeah, I mean, each meeting we get not just the zoning ordinance, but the plats, all the lot divisions, all the documents that are presented to you all at the meeting, we get to see ahead of time. So we do have that opportunity. It's not necessarily that we're reading it while we're sitting here, but we do have that opportunity to do it ahead of time, individually. It gets emailed to us.
I reviewed them. The only thing I didn't get until yesterday was the school plat, but we really don't have a say in that. So I reviewed it when I saw it, but we really can't, it's not us to decide. That did come later. Everything else came last week, and I did review it.
I appreciate that you did. Any others who chose not to answer, that's your choice.
Anything else real quick before we decide to adjourn?
I have a small curiosity. The proposed school board use of the land for the athletic center, I've heard you speak tonight that we don't have any say over it. Yet when I inquired at the superintendent, he said it will be financed by Fort Thomas resident taxes. So why don't we have a say in it?
The state legislature.
Yes, so KRS 100 is the document that gives authority to not just the city of Fort Thomas, but all municipalities in the state of Kentucky in terms of what their zoning authority is. That code section actually states verbatim that municipalities do not have the authority to control certain public entities in terms of zoning. And one of those public entities is public schools. And so while they can certainly come here and show us what they're presenting to do, we can't control what happens on their property in the same way, for example, we can control what we were talking about at Bivouac and Rossmore. So that is a state preemption that has gone back decades ago that we have no control over.
And that makes perfect sense, but then why is our tax dollar from Fort Thomas being used to finance it when other schools will be utilizing it?
I mean, it's a question for the school district, but it's the taxes that you're paying to the school district, not to the city.
But they're city taxes, are they not?
They're city of Fort Thomas taxes. You're not paying them to the city of Fort Thomas.
I'm sorry, say that again.
That's what we're right to say.
Would you say that again?
A portion of your taxes is paid to the school district, not to the city. So the financing that the school district is using your real estate taxes paid to the school district, not to the city of Fort Thomas.
Oh, sure. But the city's paying $525,000 too, so.
There's a proposal in a memorandum of agreement that the city contribute up to around $500,000. That is something, again, not for these folks. Really, that's a city council matter, and so I don't think it's appropriate to grill them on something they have no decision.
No, I was just curious where that line is, and the KRS that you spoke of makes that part very clear. I'm just baffled that we can be told we're
taxed for it, but we have no say about it. And
You can go to school district, their school district meetings and talk to them about it.
And the city council meeting.
Yeah.
there's a lot of this that goes on. Go ask Valerie.
I
But thank you.
appreciate what you're saying, but.
Thank you for explaining that.
And school tax just went up 4%.
And so did the city tax, well, they both went up 4.
We have a motion and a second to adjourn. Meeting is adjourned. Thank you for coming.
Okay, thank you.
Oh,